Hello, everybody. How are you all doing today? Everybody? Okay, hold on. Let me try. Do I need to go back out? Come back in. How are you guys doing today? Yes, that's better. Okay. I have the honor today. Our fabulous MC is out of town right now, so I'm going to introduce our guests at the table. So we have Jennifer. Come on out. Like the price is right. I don't have any prizes, though. Kevin. Jarrett, Camden, Alex, and Tiffany. One of our guests that was invited to the table got sick today, so we have Tiffany taking her place. So thank you so much, Tiffany, for being so gracious in doing that. No, Alex, I'm gonna have you sit here. Camden, I'm gonna have you sit here, and I get to be in the middle. All right. Okay. Woo. All right, y'all. I'm hot. I got hot again, so bear with me. Woo. All right. I'm sorry. Listen, I can write a book. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Before we begin, I want to try something new. I want to ask you, if you learned something part of history when you were a child and you were super impressed by it, super excited, raise your hand. Now, did you learn something about history? Thank you. Did you learn something about history when you were an adult that shocked you, upset you, questioned? You questioned it? Yes. Okay. Woo. All right. So, that space between pride and discomfort is where we're sitting tonight. This is where we're going to sit tonight. Because right now, beyond this room, history itself is being debated. Books are being challenged, curriculum is being revised, artifacts are being removed, and some stories are being amplified, while others are being questioned, softened, or omitted. And it raises a deeper question. Should history be shared entirely? The good, the bad, and the uncomfortable. When parts of history are removed, is that protection? Is it age appropriateness? Is it political? Is it erasure? Who decides what is too much? Who decides what is necessary? And what happens when entire communities see their stories maybe minimized or missing? Is it discomfort? Something we should shield people from? Sometimes people feel like history is something that may be too harsh for people to know about. Or is discomfort sometimes the cost of honesty? Tonight is not about accusation, it's about examination. History is not just what happened, it is what we chose to preserve, what we choose to teach, and what we choose to remember. And in a moment where history is being challenged, destroyed, erased, or omitted in different ways, we have to ask, what lies in the silence? So let's explore that together. Are you guys ready? Awesome, awesome. I'm sorry, y'all. Okay. So I want to get right into it. And I hope that everybody is prepared to be super honest today, right? I think that these conversations are so important for us to move forward as a community and as individuals. So I want to ask, is avoiding uncomfortable history an act of protection or an act of control? Do you think it's an act of protection? Because let me say, right now we have it where people in different institutions feel like history was too harsh, right? Different parts of history were too harsh. And so it's this question of protection, or is it control? To control the narrative, control what people learn? What do you all think? Talk to me. We have 2 hours, so you have to say things. Turn your mics on, let's go.
Sure, yeah, I'm always willing to talk. It's a broad question, and it depends on often the country or community that you're in. So I think Alex can jump in here in a minute where, he comes from a country where the history is really set, centrally. I think most people, especially if you're going through kind of a public school system, it's almost incentivized to have pride in the country or the government wherever you live. I don't think that's unique to the United States. I think that's pretty much everywhere. And then also pride in your culture or community or wherever you came from. And that often will shade the way that you look at history. And I think that's just a totally natural, normal thing. And particularly, like you said, when you're a kid and you're learning things for the first time. But then it's also incumbent on you as an adult to not even so much like what history is true, but actually what the correct context is in that history. Because it's a question of, is the United States a good country? Yes and no. There's some really great things we've done. There's really bad things we've done. Are these people, these individuals we learn about, great people? Yes and no. You know, we're in a church, I guess I can say, unless it's Jesus Christ, everybody's going to have a lot of good and bad. But what you choose to emphasize in those people tells you a lot about the school system, the country, and the state that you're in.
Thank you. Anybody else? Kevin, did you have something to say?
Okay, so I think that, yeah, when kids are younger, there's a certain amount of just like comfort and like a celebratory nature to the way we teach history. Yeah.
Just make sure it's on for you. Okay, you're on.
Okay, I've got it. Are we good? Okay. All right. So, but I do think there is a certain aspect of control. I think that what we're seeing in the current debates is very much about control, about wanting to highlight certain histories, and those histories often are white, and white men in particular. And we see that right now. And we see what is being pulled back, what the military has decided shouldn't be taught in military schools, or for on bases and things like that, for the things that are being pulled down in public spheres. That's Black history, that's brown history, that's gay history, and the only reason you're doing that is because somehow this allows you to control this narrative. And it could be comfort too, because, you know, maybe that makes certain people more comfortable. But I do think it's more about control, what we're seeing right now.
Okay. Kevin, I want you to ask me, and I want to add on to that, or ask, I'm sorry. I usually have a headset on, I'm sorry. So I want to add, what do you think the narrative is? Because you mentioned that they're trying to protect a narrative. They is, you know, kind of up in the sky. But what is the narrative that they're trying to protect or portray the United States as?
So we tend to have like this archetype of what an American should be. This is something that we've been teaching for generations. And that is a white, male, Christian, property owning, straight, heterosexual. I said straight and heterosexual. I meant to say cisgendered. Sorry. It's hard when you make a list. Yeah. So, you know, but that is that archetype. And we're essentially taught by celebrating certain aspects of those parts of history to protect that archetype.
Yeah, one of the things I would add is I do see it as a symptom of control, and I describe it as a symptom of control. I think within the context of, and I'll speak within what I know, the context of the United States, so often history seems to be protected. And I do agree that, you know, so often in our schools, we see some of that control. But I also think about my experience. You know, I grew up in, you know, Carlton schools before moving to Detroit. And the histories that I learned in my household were not what I was taught at Carlton. You know, we had Black magazines. My grandmother, she was a domestic in the South. She talked about her experiences. She brought not only the quilts, but she brought Black memorabilia that white households gave her back home with her. And we talked about those issues. We talked about those things even as kids. When I moved to Detroit, a lot of things that were in my household were the things that were celebrated in Detroit public schools. And so what I was learning in Detroit seemed to provide some liberation, but even still, it was confined within a certain type of archetype. It was confined within, okay, what do we teach about Black history? What are the confined or the prescribed stories that we should share? So I do think across different groups, and I would even probably say even within my household, just at that level, there is some level of control in terms of how we teach history, and I think that can be for different reasons, whether or not it's age appropriateness. Are people ready? Is it the context? Do you just not want to get in a fight with the person next to you? So how do you talk about certain histories and certain things and just either keep the peace or really be at the point of pushing things further?
Thank you.
Is my mic on? Okay, perfect. Just to give a little introduction to who I am. Hi, I'm Camden. I'm a senior at Down High School, and I think just for this question, it depends on who you're talking to. Because in the school systems, it depends on your age of when we start talking about things. I think of the Holocaust. I think of the darker parts of the civil rights movement. I am taking a class called IB, International Baccalaureate 20th Century Topics, and I actually just did my internal assessment, which is a 2,000-word paper on the Black Panther political party during the civil rights movement. And there are some very violent parts of that, especially from the white aspect and the white people who are absolutely violating the black members of the party. And I think when it comes to just age, the sense of protection for those younger kids, I'm thinking elementary school into early middle school, but after that, I believe it's extremely important to start talking about those tough topics. Because without that, how are we going to be able to ease our kids into learning the rest of the difficulties? I remember the first time I was in 8th grade, I watched The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. I was sobbing in my 8th grade history class. I probably was about 13, 14, and that was a lot for me to handle. But without that experience, I, number one, would not be the person I am today, and I would not look at history the way I would. Looking at the political world, I do think some of it is control. There are people who want to destroy certain narratives and make things look like someone may be the victim when necessarily they aren't. And referring back to my project that I just did, just because I just finished my IA, very grateful and so exciting that I got to do that, because 20th Century Topics is, we learn a lot. We've gone from the Russian Revolution, World War I, World War II, and right now we're getting into the Cold War. And with our IA topics, we all get to choose our own items. We haven't got to our civil rights movement yet, but the thing is, that's later in the year, it was my choice to do that. So it's just really interesting to see what the choice is for students on how they are able to, exactly what they're interested in and also what they're able to access by that choice. Because I think of the other history classes that are taught at my high school, that's not necessarily the case, that they get to choose what they're interested in. So with that, a little bit in the school system, I think there is a bit of a controlled narrative, but it really just depends on what class you take, your interest in the class levels you're in. But again, with politics, the narrative, referring back to my IA, I think of how in white media, they would make the Black Panthers appear to be the aggressors when really it would be the white people. And just thinking about how we see that today and just happening right in front of our faces now of how we see people trying to control that narrative.
Thank you. Tiffany?
All right, so I come from a public school sector, and I heard Kevin say a lot of times people don't want to have these conversations because they don't want to get into a fight. But I do believe that there is, a lot has to do with controlling the narrative, and they're controlling the narrative because they want to either hide the truth, tell the truth, or tell half-truths. And people are afraid to have conversations or do certain things, even in the public school setting. We have to be very particular about the curriculum that we choose, because people are doing a lot of saving face because they don't want to get into these political fights or debates or offend a different culture or something like that. So again, I do feel that it's a sense of control to control the narrative, and then it's also to hide a lot of the truth that needs to be told.
Thank you. Well, I'm so glad that we have a space like the Breaking Bread Village where we are not afraid to have discussions. So we appreciate that. Alex, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I have a very different background, so my stories would obviously come from a different angle. I grew up in Bulgaria under socialism, and I know people complain here about political correctness, how it's killing fun and the ability of people to say things that may be fun, but some people think are offensive. Well, if you want to experience, political correctness to the max, you have to live under socialism. There are a few countries left. So hurry up. North Korea is still an option. I'll tell you a few of those stories. When my mom was in school and the Red Army had occupied already Bulgaria and imposed the socialist regime, some of the people that took the side of Stalin, they were elevated to positions of power, and as things happen under any system, some people fall from grace. They have internal conflicts within the party, and somebody is ousted, and then it's eliminated. The person is put on trial, a sham trial, a kangaroo courtroom, and he's killed. And when my mom was in school, they would ask the students, okay, now open your textbook to this page. And in that segment of the history textbook, there is the picture of this, hero of the Communist Party, who is now considered an evil person who collaborated with the West, with the Americans, and now he's the enemy. So they tell the kids, okay, now take your pen or pencil and just poke his eyes out. Okay, cut the picture, take it out. If some of you has anyone read the book 1984? Okay, well, it's you thought it was fiction, but it's based on true things. History was being rewritten the way that it would fit the narrative of the Communist Party at a point of time. Another example, way more significant, I think, is how many of you know that when World War II started, the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany were allied. They ended up on two different sides of this conflict, but initially they were allied. When Hitler invaded Poland, a few weeks later, Stalin invaded Poland from the other end. And they both performed horrible things over the people in this country. Later in 1941, Hitler invades the Soviet Union. And so immediately what the Soviet regime is doing is pulling out all the old copies of newspapers and eliminating, whitewashing, taking out all the articles, all the pictures where the Soviet, the communist military and the Nazi military are together, embracing each other, participating in military exercises, invading countries together, celebrating. Speaking of protecting people, I learned when the Berlin Wall fell from my parents that I wasn't told the true story of my Russian half of my family. It's only after socialism collapsed that they told me, your grandfather, your father's father, was a White Army officer who fought the communists. Had I learned this earlier as a kid, I might have shared this with a friend, and that friend may have shared with a parent who may have contacted the police, and my family could have been persecuted. I may not have been able to talk to you today. So here is a part of history which my family suppressed for a reason, in order to protect me from divulging a secret that would have led to repressions.
Wow, thank you. So that's almost like, thank you, Jerry. You're like, thank you. That is like righteous protection, right? I mean, that sounds like the right type of protection. So thank you for sharing that. I mean, we should have you just have an interview one day and share some of your story. I appreciate you for sharing some of that. I want to ask you guys, why do you think certain parts of history make people uncomfortable? Why are we so? Because we keep talking about protection. We're talking about, shielding people from certain things. What is it that we're shielding them from? And then also, why does it make people so uncomfortable? Why are we afraid to get into a argument or a fight when we talk about history? Jerry, you pick the mic up. You ready?
Always. You can count on me.
Tell me, why are people so uncomfortable about history?
I think people get defensive over it for reasons that I can't explain, even if I feel defensive over something. So,
Have you been defensive before about?
Well, I mean, I would say like what people want to emphasize feels like and especially in a public school setting, you can only teach so much, right? So it's like, well, if we add this, we're taking that away. But does that mean we're taking away because we don't like that person or because we just want a new perspective? But I was thinking of, I was talking with a cousin on this years ago who was a very anti like Christopher Columbus person. Okay. And she had gotten involved with like, we shouldn't celebrate him, that kind of movement. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't know much about that. So I was like reading up on it after this conversation. And it's like a funny thing because Christopher Columbus wasn't taught predominantly when your grandparents were in school or great-grandparents. It was like a modern thing. Now, why did it become a modern thing? Because Italians, we had a huge immigration of Italians who were persecuted, then kind of got to that second and third generation where they're accepted, and it became like a point of pride that Christopher Columbus was Italian, kind of complicated. And so this pro-Italian movement began getting these Christopher Columbus statues put up and things like that. I was raised in the state of Illinois. My wife's from New Jersey. I met her one time and I mentioned Casimir Pulaski. Has anyone heard of Casimir Pulaski? Okay, a couple of people in here. So in Illinois, Chicago's a huge Polish population. They wanted their person. Now, Casimir Pulaski was a Revolutionary War hero. These Poles come 150 years later to Chicago, and then we get Casimir Pulaski Day off at school. So I was happy with him, whatever he did. And so I think like there's this thing where the Italians felt like we need our person. The Poles felt like we need our person. And so it's a totally natural thing to different groups to want to do that, but you're going to subtract something else, and that's going to make somebody else. And so it becomes this complicated thing when you're trying to do curriculum. And so I guess some of it's just like, it's a natural way of feel things, but we should just learn the good and the bad and the complicated of all these different things and why they're in the curriculum.
And not be afraid of it. And and outside of just the educational system, just in general, it seems like people, especially right now, are very defensive about what took place in history that, in my opinion, I feel like we all know, like we all knew it took place. Like we've all talked about it. And now all of a sudden it seems like it's certain things that are not being voiced in the same way or taken. And I want to add, because we are, and Kevin, I see you handing that mic because I want you to talk next, but I want to add to that, another side of this, because I know we're talking about, defending maybe some Black and brown rights. I mean, but you all remember, was it 2020, 2021-ish? That whole 2020 to 2022 was a whole thing, right? And there was a moment in time, I remember in Allendale, Michigan, because I met a couple actual people that I was able to interview that was defending the monuments, the Confederate monuments. Do y'all remember that? When that was a whole thing and it was like a bunch of protesting and infighting. And so people were defending that it should be there. Then people were upset thinking they should be come down. So, and we're going to get to this part of it too, is what part of history should stay and what shouldn't, right? I am a believer that all of it should be, but we have some different thoughts on that. But Kevin, I want you to talk to the second part.
Yeah, I believe that sometimes people are uncomfortable with history because of the ways in which we were taught to learn history. Okay. And I won't say this universally, but from my experience, I think often we're encouraged to, especially as young people, to use our imaginations and try to imagine yourself, on the battlefield of this particular battle or on the quest for this particular thing. Like for a long time, I was going to be Indiana Jones. Not real history, but it just made more sense to my life. Right. But when
I knew I liked you.
But I think when you're having those conversations and people begin to say, wait, but that's not me. I didn't own slaves. That was so long ago. Why do we have to talk about this particular topic? And so then I believe then people stop imagining themselves as part of this historical story or not a part of this historical narrative. And I think that the ability to have such dissonance is also a skill that I think that we're taught, particularly when people go to say, well, we won't teach this type of history, or we won't teach these certain subjects. So I feel like we also then teach dissonance about how we can still remain empathetic to the stories that history may share, as well as be curious about what might be shared, how it's shared, what's not shared. And so I think when we can help people have a healthy, creativity with history, I feel like people can maybe enter into that space and kind of observe it and say, okay, this is it. And actually look at it and not necessarily step into the place of the person that said, your name is Kunta, but, sorry. It's Black History Month. But a roots reference. But I think that there are some ways in which we can either step into those spaces and actually engage with the history without actually being in the shoes and saying that's my great-great-grandfather.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that imagination is a part, though, that leads to the discomfort. It's the stepping into the shoes and then thinking, oh, was my family, could I have been an enslaver? Like, I don't want to think about that. You know what I mean? And especially like a child, like starting with that, right? Like that I think that sometimes that in itself, because the reality is everybody wants to be the hero of their own story, right? You want to see yourself as the hero, not the villain. And so if you are looking at a historical figure and then questioning, oh, are they the villain? Am I the villain? I think that's where that imagination, although it can open doors. I love creativity around history, but I think that sometimes is maybe part of it, because I think what we don't do a good job of teaching or of grappling with even as adults is we don't like nuance. We want it to be simple. We want Thomas Jefferson to be the guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence and, talked about our certain inalienable rights. And isn't he fantastic? And yay, third president, right? Like, we want that narrative. And that narrative is mostly true. He didn't write it by himself. Sorry. But it's fine. But it's always more complicated. I'm a professional historian, like this is what I studied. And so it's always like, I have the hardest time talking to people sometimes because I'm like, oh, but it's a little more complicated than that. But people aren't always either having the time or the willingness to engage in the fact that there are no simple boxes. Humans have always been messy AF, like I tell my students. And we are just messy. Thomas Jefferson did some amazing things that left a legacy that should instill some pride. But he also enslaved people. And he knew it was wrong. And he still did it. And we have to grapple with those aspects too. It's a both and. It's always a both and with history. We just don't like that.
Yeah. Anybody want to
Yeah, I'd love to add on. I totally love that. And I think, again, kind of going off of what you just said, people don't like hard history because it's embarrassing for them. And as the daughter of two educators, my mom's here. Hi, Mom. I'm going to tell your story if you don't mind. Don't be worried. But, my mom teaches sixth grade geography. Is it social studies or geography? It's geography. And she was talking about how the Declaration of Independence, and she asked her students who all signed it. And she had the kids look, and then she pointed out it was all white men. Then a couple weeks later, she got an email from a parent saying, "Why did you teach this? You made my son feel bad for being a white man." And it's kind of that idea of, again, kind of repeating what you said, feeling embarrassed of, oh, that could have been someone I'm related to, that could have been my ancestor, that could have been me. And so I think something that really I would love to see being taught in school is, yes, this happened, and now that you know this happened, what are you going to do in the future to change it? And kind of bring that idea of, yes, this might be harsh to hear, but it's important to hear. So we all hear history repeats itself. But again, saying it and explaining it so it doesn't happen again.
I just want to say one thing on why people would get defense. So, my great-grandparents came here from Croatia. They weren't around when the Declaration of Independence was written. They weren't around with, there's no... until my great grandfather was born, every male member of my family was a serf of the Habsburg Empire. I have no relation to that. It has no effect on my life. I'm glad that they made it to America, and it did. But I'm not looking back like, man, I like the Habsburgs and I don't like the Ottoman Empire. Like, I could care less. Like, I have my beliefs the way I am now. So it is interesting. Like, are you related to Thomas Jefferson? What do you care if just learn the history? And it's almost like people feel this need to be defensive over something that they didn't do. No one they're related to other than by this tiny percentage did. And I think it is to that point of like, it's like, wait, what would I have done if I was alive then? And they feel some defensive to want to, but it also could be from the right place. Like, they're defensive over the good parts of those people, which I think is a good thing. Like, other than the people showing up to some of those rallies, like with a Confederate flag, like, we're in Michigan, like that was the other side. I don't know. So anyways, I just don't get quite why people are that defensive over people they're not connected to, and that nobody is blaming them for doing, I guess.
So, and I wanted to share, thank you for sharing that. And Kevin, I saw you wanted to say something.